Good morning. Welcome to Moving Markets. My name is Jeffry Dunyon. Today is April the 30th, last day of April. Hope everyone's looking forward to May. May is officially and formally known as the best month of the entire year. I'm not going to necessarily speak as to why that's the case. A lot going on today, but kind of with one or two big exceptions, kind of a slow day in the market. The Dow Jones is down 52 points right now. It is almost 9 o'clock in Mountain Time Zone, makes it almost 11 o'clock on the East Coast. The big news today in the stock market is Google, Alphabet, the parent company of Google. They reported their earnings after the market closed last night, and the revenue numbers disappointed. It's as simple as that. They weren't off on earnings per share. They were off on revenue. The stock has been punished today. I'm going to turn my head here. You get to see my profile if you're looking at the video presentation here. Down 8.5% right now, $110 a share down. Now, let me put $110 a share into perspective. Google is a $1,300 a share stock before this morning. $110 a share is about 8.5%. We see a lot of companies when they report their earnings make a bigger move to the upside or a bigger move to the downside than 8.5%, 9%. Now that's still a huge one-day move for any stock, but it's not massive in terms of what we've seen. We've seen companies that have moved 15, 20% in a single day based on good or bad earnings numbers. And that's simply not the case here. So it's still disappointing. The thing that's disappointing to me about this Google number, I don't trade Google stock, by the way. Full disclosure, I don't own any shares of Google. I don't trade their stock. I'm like a lot of people. I use Google every single day without hardly thinking about it. It's become a part of, you do a Google search on something. I've got Google is set up as the default search engine on my phone, on my iPad, on my computer. I have several computers. I have a big PC. I have a laptop PC. I have a Mac. Google is set up as the primary search engine on all of those. In fact, I get a little bit annoyed when some program tries to switch the default search engine, and I find that I'm using Yahoo search or Bing. I don't have anything against Microsoft. I think from a standpoint of internet and web browsing, Microsoft fell behind Chrome and Mozilla, and Bing, their search engine, is way behind Google, not nearly as robust. Most people that use search engines, they use Google for good reason. It's the best one that's out there. I don't have anything against the company. I don't really care about the company one way or the other from a trading perspective. It doesn't bother me if Google is up or down, other than how it might affect the whole market. And it's definitely Google is the drag on the market today. There's no question about that. When a company that big is falling, a lot of stocks fall with it, because any mutual fund or ETF or hedge fund that has shares of Google in it, the stock price is falling because people are selling out of Google. And the only way to sell out of Google when it's part of a mutual fund or an exchange traded fund is to sell the entire fund. And so all the other stocks that make up a part of that fund are also being sold, and that has a tendency to bring everything down a little bit. So it's definitely a drag on the overall market. But here's what bothers me about the earnings miss, specifically about the revenue miss. Google got a massive fine levied at them. I want to say 3 or 4 months ago. I might be off a little bit on the timing. 3, 4, 5 months ago, Google got this massive, massive fine that was levied from the European Union. Now, I'm not an expert on the European Union. I know what the European Union is. I know the reason why it was formed. I know the struggles that they've had, specifically the United Kingdom, England trying to exit the European Union. You hear the word Brexit thrown around. That's just a clever little abbreviation for Britain trying to exit the European Union. The European Union, the problem that the people who don't like the European Union, the problem they have with it is this. The bureaucrats that meet together at their headquarters in Brussels, they are not elected officials, and yet they are appointed officials. Now, each of the governments that represented there get to appoint officials, and these unelected officials make policy that all of the countries that are part of the European Union are forced to follow. It's like imagine if the United Nations could make all the laws for our country, and we didn't have a say so on who belonged to the United Nations. That's the problem that people have with the European Union. It's one thing to have international law and say if you're going to travel and you're going to be in international waters, if you're going to be doing business with companies with companies in other country, you have to abide by certain rules and certain regulations and certain laws. I'm okay with that up to a certain point, but try and imagine if the European Union were to make a law on what, something that I could or could not do here in the state of Utah, or something that I could or could not do in the United States. Imagine if it was the United Nations making that law. The United Nations has one ambassador from the United States and then a bunch of ambassadors from other countries. Those ambassadors from other countries are not people that I've elected. They have no right, they have no business country. They can make laws that affect me when I'm doing business with other countries, when I'm traveling internationally. Again, I'm up to a point, I'm okay with that. And I say up to a point because it is the nature of all governments to overreach and to overregulate and to overextend themselves. So you've got the European Union, that a lot of people in all the countries that belong to the European Union don't like it, because they do in fact write and impose laws for the citizens of those countries. And some of those laws are very, people in the countries feel like they're very unfair. But the European Union has been known, this is not the first instance that it's happened, they have been known to levy huge fines on U.S. companies that do business in Europe, and they levy these fines under the premise of antitrust law violations. That's basically a fancy way of saying monopoly. You've got a monopoly. You're not allowing other smaller companies to compete with you because you're so big they just can't keep up. And so you're violating our antitrust laws. We're going to slap this big huge fine on you. It is a disguised a faintly disguised tax is all it is. It's the European Union's way of saying, look, we can't tax Google because Google is not headquartered here in the European Union. We can tax some of the transactions that they make. We can tax certain things they do. If they have an office over here, obviously that office has to pay some property taxes or some local taxes, whatever the case may be. But as far as Google as a corporate entity, which is headquartered in the United States, the European Union cannot tax their profits because they're not a European Union company. They're not a German company. They're not a French company. They're not an English company. They are a US company. Therefore, the European Union cannot tax their profits. Well, the European Union doesn't like that. They don't like the fact that 90% of their citizens, just like over here, use Google, and they don't get a piece of that, like our government gets a piece of that. And so they trump up these BS antitrust rules, and they slap a big fine, and it's just to take the place of them being able to get a piece of the corporate profits through taxation. It is a form of taxation without representation. If you want a quick history lesson, the reason we being the United States, the reason we left England and had a revolution back in 1776 was over taxation without representation. It was less about the fact that England wanted to tax the colonies. It was less about the fact that England wanted to have government officials and military officials present in the colonies. It was the fact that England did not want the colonies to have a voice in Parliament. So here they wanted to control the colonies, but they didn't want the colonies to have a voice in what they were doing. It's the same thing, folks. It's not different. It's just done in a different way. It is taxation without representation. We don't have a seat in Brussels at the European Union. So ticks them off that they can't tax us because we have no representation. So they find another clever way to tax us. The point of all of this, I hope you had a good history lesson there. The point of all of this is that the amount of revenue that Google missed on its earnings. You've got analysts saying, we expect your earnings to come in here. Google actually came in right here. That difference almost matched up perfectly with the fine that Google paid to the European Union. So I think, even though I don't trade their stock and I don't care that much about Google from a stock perspective, it's really unfair. And I think they got treated unfairly, and they're being treated unfairly by the investment community right now. The fact that people are selling off and selling out of this company, it speaks in part to the lack of intelligence that exists with your average fund manager and with a lot of people that manage their own money. There's no reason to be selling Google. Google's a cash printing machine. When you think about the money that they generate and what little overhead they have, and here's what I mean by this. Google's money comes in through all the advertising they sell. Every time you click on a website, every time you click on a link, probably there's an ad that's been sold on some company's behalf, and Google is the one selling that ad for them. They make huge amounts of revenue there. This is all done by computers, and your entire overhead, your entire overhead of your organization, if you don't count research and development. Now, Google is getting stuff like that. That's all great. I love companies that reinvest their profits into R&D and look for ways to innovate and make new products and come up with new stuff. But they don't have a widget that they're making. They don't have a piece of equipment that they are manufacturing as the main part of their business. I know Google, they sell the Google, they've got the Google phone. I think the Pixel is a Google made phone. The Google Chrome thing that you can plug into your TV, that's kind of like a crappy version of a Roku or an Apple TV. It was their answer to those kind of things. I think it's a miserable failure because I don't know a single human being that has one of them. But other than a couple of little things that they've dabbled in like that, they're not out spending money like a company like Boeing or a company like Apple, where a lot of and Apple may not be a great example because Apple has got let me use Caterpillar as an example. Apple does a lot of things that don't attach hardware or hard physical devices with it. But if you've got a company like Caterpillar, a lot of their overhead is in manufacturing tractors and big industrial pieces of equipment, and not just the labor cost that goes into that, the people that have to work those machines. You've got the cost of raw materials, the cost of actual products that have to come together to make this final product. Nike's a good example of this. These companies that have overhead that exists in the physical raw materials that they need to put together a product, this is largely absent from a company like Google. And so a company like Google is just a cash printing machine. That's not going to change because the European Union finds a way to tax them. And so it's more than a little bit unfair. If I were an executive at Google, I would basically thumb my nose to the European Union and say, come try and take it from me. And when the European Union decides that they're going to block people's use of Google over in Europe because of what Google is doing, the people will revolt. I mean, the Great Britain trying to leave the European Union is a revolt from the European Union. It's not like the Revolution of 1776 when we left England, but it's because it's taking place in a far more diplomatic way. I don't think swords are ever going to be raised or guns are ever going to be fired for that type of a revolution. But it would be a revolution. People would rise up and say, no, this is not what we want. We don't want you to keep Google out of here simply because you can't tax them the way you tax European headquartered companies. So I think it's wrong for Google to pay the fine. I would tell the bureaucrats at the EU who imposed that fine, I'd tell them where they could stick that fine, and it would be a very unpleasant location on their bodies. That's what's moving markets today, though. The Dow, something else has happened, and I'm not up immediately on the news, but just in the time I've been online live here now for less than 15 minutes. And in that 15 minutes, you can see me, if you're watching me live, you can see me looking down at my phone. In that 15 minutes, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has gone from being down about 50 points to being down over 130 points. Something, don't know what, but something has rocked the markets just in the last little bit. And I don't know what that is. So we'll have to find out when we get on live. When we get online live tomorrow, I'll be able to speak more intelligently to what's causing the markets to absolutely tank. The only headline that I'm bringing up, you still see me looking down at I'm scrambling for what in the world is going on. The only headline says the Dow falls over 100 points and the NASDAQ retreats from record highs as Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, drops on weak revenue. It's more than just Google. They're how far down they are hasn't changed one penny from when we started this presentation live a little over 15 minutes ago. So something else has gone on that's kind of spooked the markets, and it might be a temporary thing. We might be back up by the time the day is over. Politically, there's not. Well, I was about to say there's not a whole lot going on. There's not a whole lot going on politically in the United States, but this is a big deal. And this is something people need to be aware of, because I'm going to tell you exactly why and how it could affect the U.S. markets. There is a full-on revolution now in Venezuela. There has been the bubbling and the brewing of a revolution in Venezuela for a few months now. President Guaido, who is the recognized by most of the free world, pretty much everyone except Russia and China and Cuba, recognize Guaido as the interim president, and they recognize his authority as such. Although Maduro, the dictator, socialist, communist, call him whatever you want, he's the guy that took Hugo Chavez's place. He is maintaining power. He is staying. He's maintaining his claim on power and his claim in office. And this has been going on. The people of Venezuela are starving. By the way, shout out to every single liberal who thinks that democratic socialism is a real thing. Putting the word Democrat is nothing but the appearance. Socialism is socialism. And for those of you that believe and think that we could go down the road of socialism and not end up like Venezuela, you better pull your heads out of your butts really quickly, and you better rethink that, because nowhere in the history of this world from creation to today has socialism ever succeeded in any form, ever. And if you want to point to places like Switzerland, like Norway and Finland, and say those are examples of democratic socialism works, that is flat out BS. Those are not socialist countries. Those are capitalist countries that have fewer business regulations than the United States. And because of thriving, uninhibited, unencumbered capitalism, they have more money to spend on social bad shape financially. So even there, you don't have a shining example of socialism working. And it's not socialism. You don't even have an example of those socialistic programs working. All right. Here's the thing with Venezuela, and here's what it could do to our markets. Venezuela has huge oil supplies, probably the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, and certainly the largest in South America. I may be wrong on Southern Hemisphere, but I'm not aware of a lot of African countries that aren't in Northern Africa, which is above the equator, that have larger oil reserves. So I think Venezuela might have the honor of the largest oil reserves of anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere. Here's why that's such a huge deal. If their economy is in shambles because when oil prices went down, the government-controlled oil industry tanked. And that's the only way that government remained propped up in a socialistic situation, is that they had oil revenues. Oil prices went down, and oil embargoes from other countries because of the human rights atrocities slowed down the flow of cash, and the company fell into disarray and disorder. If Guaido is successful in this revolution, and I think the United States needs to do everything in its power, including military democracy. I don't know what kind of a capitalist he is, but I hope he's coming from the thread of recognizing how wrong socialism is and how devastating it is to a country and to a people. If Guaido is successful, you're going to see oil prices go down, because immediately embargoes are going to be lifted, restrictions are going to be lifted on Venezuela being able to sell oil. The government maintain control of it for a period of time to help stabilize things, but eventually that oil is going to be turned back over to private industry and private companies, and that's going to be a boon to their economy. That's going to help their economy get back on its feet. It's going to take a lot more than that, but that's going to be a huge boost. That could rock oil prices here, which would bring companies like Chevron, ExxonMobil, Valero Oil, those companies would be down, and they can have a little bit of a drag on the market, but lower oil prices is overall a good thing for the economy. The price of everything we consume, every product you buy at the grocery store, every piece of clothing that you wear, every piece of electronic that you have around you and that you use on a daily basis is affected by the price of oil, because oil and gas prices determine how cost effective it is to get those things on shelves, to ship them to you, to be able to have Amazon deliver something to your home. It's got to go through FedEx or UPS right now, and oil prices are a factor. Gasoline prices are a factor. So when the price per barrel of oil is coming down, and that will happen when there's more oil on the market. It's simple supply demand economics. I feel bad if anyone is sharing this podcast with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because if you talk to her about simple supply and demand economics, she's going to get this glassed over look in her eyes and not even know what you're talking about. She's that dumb when it comes, and she has a degree in economics. I don't have a degree in economics. My 16-year-old doesn't have a degree in economics, and I would put him head to head with her on understanding the economy any day of the week. Boston College, you should be ashamed of yourself for awarding that idiot a degree. I guarantee if she took a test at my son's high school, she would fail it on economics. Anyway, I just can't resist getting a little dig in there. Folks, that's where we're at with moving the markets today. Keep an eye on what's going on in Venezuela. It could have a big impact short term on our markets. It's not going to have a big long-term effect, unless somehow Maduro manages to stay in power and squash this, and unless it escalates into more of a situation between us and China and us and Russia, because China and Russia benefit from the oil that Venezuela is illegally selling them, and they don't want that to go away. They're going to do what they can without incurring the ire of the whole rest of the world. They're going to do what they can to keep Maduro somewhat propped up, but I think they see that it may be a losing proposition, and hopefully they'll back away and let the natural course of things play out there, which is going to be Guaido coming into power and Venezuela returning to a prosperous democratic country. I hope that happens. Hopes and prayers are with the people of Venezuela, because they're the ones paying the ultimate price, and they're the ones that will gain the ultimate victory if they can get that a-hole Maduro out of there and get Russia and China out of there on a somewhat permanent basis, and Cuba. Okay, that's it, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.